Priya Hunt, an executive coach whose mission is to inspire leaders like you to thrive and make an even bigger impact. Welcome to Ideasparks. This is a discussion focused on a leadership topic to spark some ideas in us by talking to people who bring their really varied and interesting perspectives to the subject. Today, I am really excited to be talking to a panel of leaders who have personally mentored and inspired me throughout my career journey about a topic that matters a lot to me. It's about bringing your whole self to work. Abby, Lisa, Sian, thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear a bit about you. So Abby, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about you.
Thanks, Priya. So I've had a career of two halves today. I started off as a management consultant, and then I moved into the ever complex, ever changing world of telecommunications. Most recently as Director of Strategy, Marketing and Transformation at Virgin Media O2.
Brilliant. Welcome. And thank you so much for making the time. And Lisa.
Yeah, sure. Lisa Harrington. I guess I've had a career of three halves, if that's possible. So following a theme, first bit was also consulting and telecoms. So you said very similar to Abby. And then my latter career has been a portfolio of private equity and board roles. So very much a kind of a mix of different boards, but usually purpose-led boards like the post office, and boards that have an impact in society.
Brilliant. And Sian, last but not least.
I feel like I need to say quarters or a fifth. So I started out I started out in management consulting too. I think I did about 11 years in telecoms, various product roles, ran a subsidiary of BT for a while. Now I'm in energy, and I completed the management buyout of the company I now run in March 21, so we're also private equity backed, so similar to Lisa's background. And I also have had and currently still have a non-exec role with the UK Statistics Authority, which oversees the ONS and OSR.
And the three of you have sort of inspired me and taught me a lot about bringing your whole self to work and being comfortable with that. But as a leader and an individual, Sian, why do you think it's important to bring your whole self to work?
Gosh, I was thinking about this before the interview, not to announce to everyone you let us see the questions in advance, but I was thinking about this, and the best way I've got to describe it is, if you thought about your friendships, your family, your home life, and considered the dynamic where you would put on a suit, put on a front, you would hide behind a layer that wasn't you, and you know that would breed trust, engagement, love, affection, support, satisfaction. Well, it wouldn't. I mean, it sounds absolutely ludicrous that you would do anything other than bring your whole self into your life. And so the concept that you wouldn't do it at work, which, to be blunt, I don't think I did through all of my 20s and most of my 30s, I think we're thoroughly encouraged not to bring our whole self to work. And that changed for me as I got older. It changed because I think notions in society changed. And then I think it fundamentally changed with the pandemic. It's the one massively positive thing to come out of it. I mean, I turn up in my slippers, my jammies and all sorts onto my calls now, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And I hope that it won't change for me. Our dress code at our company's changed, the conversations we have, the camaraderie we have. Everyone talks about their dogs, their kids, the fluidity of the working practices is different. And there is just no shame in that now at all in any way. And I did feel a level of shame in my 20s or I would have done if I'd have brought any number of topics into the workplace. And the reality that you can be your whole self, then if you look at it in that context, you go, how did we ever have trust? How did we ever have trust in the workplace without being able to bring our whole selves to work? It's nuts. And we talked about it all the time as businesses. And my memory of my 20s, and I worked for some amazing brands who I love to this day and treated me very well and gave me an amazing career start. But, you know, the number of initiatives we started where me and everyone else would roll our eyes. Oh, yeah, That's really what this initiative's about. And I don't think, certainly, maybe I've got a completely biased viewpoint from where I sit with the company, you know, where I sit in the company that I run, but I don't think that's true. I think there's a level of trust that comes from myself, the management team, every employee in the company, every colleague being able to be themselves. And that's not 100% perfect. It's not. I have conversations with people every day who still share things with me that they would not feel comfortable being in the wider, you know, the wider context of work, but that they are warming up to it, that it's getting better. And with every step that we make towards being able to truly be ourselves in the same way that we are with our friends and family, I think we breed trust, and with trust comes more effective decision making. It comes better results, if we want to tie it to the bottom line. But ultimately, it's just a hell of a lot more enjoyable. I realised how much energy I expended trying to not be me, and it's just so much. It's so much more enjoyable to bring your whole self to work. And when you enjoy your work, you produce better results. And so, you know, I think it's a massive step forward that we're able to do that. I now can't imagine going backwards. And I find it really reassuring that with all of that transition, and particularly, I think it's been expedited by the pandemic, I think business performance has improved, certainly in my context and in the world in which I sort of move. So, yeah.
But I think, echoing some of what Sian said, you may make a choice to present a different image, a different self-image, but you'll never be able to sustain it. So in a way, there isn't really a choice. I think, you know, I was given a great piece of advice once, which was, you can put on your armor and you can go into work and you can mold yourself in the way that you think people want you to look and act. But when you're stressed, that you will not show up like that. You'll show up as you truly are. And actually, the fact that you've changed is more disorienting for your team than any personal style you could ever have, because it's seeing someone flip from, you know, for example, a very, you know, sort of cool, composed, professional image to someone who suddenly appears very stressed. That's what really, you know, worries your team. So I've sought to really take that advice. I mean, like Sian, there've been periods in my life where I have felt less encouraged to bring my whole self to work. When I started work, I was 21 and 2 months. I was working for a management consultancy. I'd never been in an office before, really. You know, I was working with fairly senior executives, and I was just desperate for no one to know I was 21. And it sounds so silly now that I look back, age 43, and think, why did it matter to me that they thought maybe I was 23 rather than 21? You know, I don't perceive a huge difference in terms of level of experience in those ages. But at the time, I really went to lengths that I now think are a bit silly. So I wouldn't say, for example, I'm going home to see my parents on the weekend, because I thought that's something a 21-year-old would say. You know, I'll just say I'm visiting friends. You know, I had all these little coping mechanisms that actually didn't help at all. So yeah, I'm fortunate that I was in an environment where, you know, I was encouraged to look a bit deeper. That I had this great advice early on to just stay true to yourself, and because that's how you're going to show up at some point. So, you know, be more consistent, because that's what your team need from you as a leader. And I've tried to live with it, and I think there's always a balance. So you know, often having a fresh perspective, being a bit different to everyone around you, gives extra value. You can be that person who says, well, actually, as a potential customer for this product, I don't think that sounds that great. Or, you know, as someone who's been communicated to about a change in the organization, that wouldn't work for me. You know, embrace it, really.
But it's not always easy. So we talk a lot about equity, equality, inclusion, diversity. But Lisa, I'd be very curious to know whether throughout your career, have you ever felt that you didn't belong, and, you know, there is an in club and you're not part of that? And that must be really tough. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's funny. I guess I've worked in lots of male-dominated environments, as have Sian and Abby. Not really, actually. People were generally always quite inclusive in a telecoms context, even in very engineering contexts as well. So I might have been the only female in the room, but I didn't necessarily feel that I didn't fit in. very, very early in my career, I did have a very negative experience of being Irish in the UK. And it was when there was still, you know, maybe some kind of spillover historically. And actually, I just lifted myself out of the situation. I decided it wasn't for me. I was on a project where there was kind of visible hostility to the fact that I was Irish, and possibly somebody had an awful personal experience, maybe, I don't know. And I decided that actually, rather than kind of hitting it head on, it was easier to ask to move projects, and I did. And I would do that again, because I do think if you're uncomfortable and it's not something that you feel you know, you really want to take on, there are times that actually it's easier to just lift yourself out and not put yourself through you know, difficult you know, situations, and you never really know what's going on in people's heads. I you know, similar to Abby, I got good advice once that if you find you're locking horns at somebody and you can't really understand why, you know, really try to put yourself in their shoes, and you never know what it is that's triggering why they're behaving the way they are. But you know, more and more, I think everybody wants diversity of age, of ethnicity, of you know, sexual preference. Gender is almost an afterthought anymore, because it's actually quite unusual to be the only female in a room anymore, and that's great, particularly in a board context. And certainly regulators are making, I do think it's been a really big step forward to set quotas, and for, you know, investors to say it's not acceptable, in the same way that they're saying a lack of ESG focus isn't acceptable. So I think things are moving, and things are moving on, which is great.
Yeah, do you know what? It made me think about a story I've told many times actually, but still is relevant here. You know, by the time I'd got to I think I made, these job titles don't matter anymore, they really don't, but back then they really did. I think I made director, or the bit where you come off the pay scale, the public pay scale at BT. These things used to really matter. It just makes me laugh now. When I was 29, and it somehow very much, I was just said, it really bothered me. Age was just this big deal. It was often a much bigger deal for me than gender, and so I started changing everything about my dress, and I cut my hair a certain way, and I was just desperately trying to look older or more serious. And do you know what? That really damaged. It really ended up damaging my confidence, and you can get quite lost in not being you if you're not careful. I mean, that's the other end of not bringing your whole self to work, is actually fundamentally not bringing you to work, let alone your whole self, any of yourself. And I've always sort of remembered that story as being an important learning on my own journey. And then you sort of fast forward to the current day, where I do feel like I'm probably being very much of myself to work. I think people have enough of it 9 days out of 10. But I feel very relaxed. I'm very me. I don't worry what I say or how I say it, because I believe I'm a genuinely polite, kind person. And so even if it comes out slightly wrong, that the intent was well understood. But I am starting to worry whether that belief is quite right. So I am. So to also share another memory of being a sort of a new entrant to the workforce in my very early 20s, and coming across people where the things they said and the way they said them, you just thought, what a plonker, or absolutely out of touch, or at times it made you feel uncomfortable. And I look back and I think that often the intent of that person was good. They just were out of touch, and they could have said it better. And so I'm now sort of quite thoughtful about how long does it take until I'm that person, and the way I'm saying it is slightly out of touch, or my intent is good, but I am actually potentially offending someone, and it genuinely isn't intentional, and I really wouldn't mean it. And I am very thoughtful about this at the moment. I'm not on Snapchat. I don't know about TikTok. I sort of, these are my personal preference is not to engage in some of these technological evolutions, even though I work in technology. And I remember my profound reaction when my stepson wanted to spend all day on YouTube watching someone play a computer game. And I thought that was just nonsense. And so even that sort of visceral reaction to how someone's choosing to spend their time is more about me being out of touch than it is about someone else's choices. And so I'm really quite philosophical about what would it take for me to get it wrong, because my assumption is, because I'm a good person and I really embrace, and I know this in my heart, I love everyone of all shapes and sizes, because it sparks my curiosity. I know that about me to be true, but I'm philosophical about my ability to just accidentally get it wrong. And the more time you spend leading an organization, or knowing that you're a role model even when you perhaps don't want to be, the more important that becomes. So I sort of think I'm probably on the precipice, and maybe in 15 years I'm going to be in someone else's story when they're doing one of these interviews. So maybe I need to resign myself to that, but that's not me either, so I'm going to keep trying. So I think changing yourself, I think if we are where I say we are, which is, you know, we're in a world where it is possible to truly bring your whole self to work. And if it's not, I'd be with Lisa. You need to just move yourself from that situation. There's not much sense in flogging a dead horse if the environment in which you're in doesn't allow you for that. But assuming you are in an environment like that, then I think, you know, you never stop working on yourself and you never stop trying. That's not the same as changing yourself. That's just finding ever more ways to connect with people, to see it from their point of view and to try and put yourself in their shoes. But my own journey is sometimes, I think we really do need to keep trying at that, and it is possible to put your foot in it. And so I apologise on this interview for all the times I'm likely to do that going forward, because I suspect it's more often than I'd like.
And I can see that all three of you, you know, there is the amount of self-assurance that you've built through experience and time. But does imposter syndrome really pop up? And Lisa, what would your advice be to people who are taking a step up in the career ladder, especially with regards to the imposter syndrome that pops up periodically?
Yeah, I mean, I see them as two slightly different things, actually. So, I mean, imposter syndrome, definitely, I think it's a really real thing. And I think, well, personally, it's real for me. I think it's real for almost anybody I've ever met. And I've yet to meet somebody who maybe doesn't have it. I think people handle it differently. So I think some people would feel somewhat reluctant to take part as a result, or might be quite quiet. I think others almost become like inflated versions of themselves because they're really trying to counterbalance their own nervousness. And I do think it's a male and female thing. I don't think it's a female thing alone. I just think men talk about it less. I also think, though, which is a weird thing, I think the day that I go into work and it's all very predictable and I don't think that there's any edge to it, and I'm not slightly terrified, I'm probably doing the wrong job. So I always feel slightly out of my depth. And that is the other advice I tend to give people, is if you don't have some slight butterflies in your stomach at some point in the day, you're probably coasting a little bit. And it might be time to expand your remit or do something slightly differently or begin to look around for something new. So I can see that it does hold some people back, and it's definitely helped. I mean, it hasn't, I don't know, I think I've always just kind of taken it head on, the imposter syndrome, but it doesn't mean I haven't felt it. But I've definitely just kind of plowed through it. But I think it does definitely impact some people. And, you know, if it is impacting people, you know, get career coaching, get advice, talk to mentors, and believe that everybody else has probably gone through it as well, and you're not the only one, because I do passionately think that that's the case. So yeah.
Can I build on that? I know that's breaking out.
No, that's fine.
I fundamentally agree with what Lisa's just said, and I'd go one step further and say sometimes we label things in a really unhelpful way. So we go imposter syndrome, like it's bad. I'm with Lisa, which is, it always feels like you're an imposter when you're in a new job, pushing boundaries that you've not done before. It's uncomfortable, it can be disorientating. And I think we have to be really careful to let these labels take hold, that if you feel that way, it's bad, and, you know, it's there, it's pushing your boundaries. And I'm not claiming it, that's always the case. And I'm sure there is a very real thing in some circumstances, but I think we have to be careful to label things negatively rather than encourage people to embrace some of these feelings as being really normal. And that edginess, I agree wholly, is a massively important part of developing yourself. And so I say, be an imposter.
Yeah.
You get over it.
Well, all athletes have butterflies at the beginning of the race. You know, all
Yeah.
sports people would say the same thing. If you don't feel slightly nervous, you know, you don't get that, you know, excited adrenaline rush. There's so many positives that come from it as well. Now, you might be terrified, but actually, if you can manage that, and some people manage it better than others, I think it's a really positive thing. You know, I do. So
That's a really different way of looking at it, and that's really helpful. And Abby, one of the things you taught me, I don't know if you know you taught me this, but you taught me was that it's important to take the time and space for recovery and well-being. And actually, all three of you have taught me that at different stages in my career. But how do you recommend, Abby, that people make sense of this when they're really trying to prove themselves, but it's really important for them to have that recovery space as well?
Yeah, so it's very kind of you to say that, Priya, because I think you're a great role model for this. And you know, there are not many people I know, Priya, who get up at 5 in the morning to do their yoga. So you found a formula that works very well for you. Wouldn't work for everyone, but it works brilliantly for you. And that's the key, I think, to find what works for you. And you know, for me, I enjoy cooking, and I think it works because it's something that I don't. In some ways it's kind of mindless. Like, I follow recipes, so I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing. I'm sort of chopping and stirring and so on, but it's entirely engrossing. It takes my full attention. I don't think about other things when I'm doing that, you know. So that would be my example. And I think it's about finding things like that, like, you know, areas that give your mind a rest, actually, and enable you to just put work to one side for a period of time, because you're engrossed in something else that you enjoy, that's for you. You know, it's not just a means to an end. That would always be my advice. And I think also it's about, you know, there is a bit, you shouldn't do it for this reason, but actually there absolutely is a work benefit to it, because very often I've struggled with a problem at work. I've gone away, I've done something different, and my unconscious mind has been ticking away in the background, and I'll think, oh, I could try this. What if I did that? Oh, you know, but perhaps so-and-so will be able to help. So giving yourself that kind of rest and recuperation, back to Lisa's athlete analogy, is so important, because it will make you better when you are actually at work. So yeah, I have no compunction about taking time out. I have no compunction about turning the phone off and not checking email, you know, constantly. Like that, there are times, you know, that there are times when you might need to be more alert to what's going on, but not often. More, I think it's really important to just take that break, again, for you as a person predominantly, but also with that side benefit of your job will be impacted positively as well.
And thank you for that. As we sort of bring this conversation towards its end, I'd love to ask each one of you, who's inspired you the most as you've progressed through your career or lives or so far, and why? And then I'd also love to hear a practical tip from you on how you bring your whole self to work every day. So Lisa, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a really early influence on my career, and it's a slightly random one. But I actually got to meet her recently, and it was an honor, because she's much older now. And we had back in the 90s an Irish female president called Mary Robinson, and the president role in Ireland is a bit of a figurehead. And she changed that. She was a trained, successful barrister. She had lots of very strong opinions on some really important matters at the time, including elements of women's rights and situation in Northern Ireland. And she was just she was such an eye-opener to a teenage girl who really hadn't seen many females, and not only taking on a role, but actually changing a role as well. So changing a role from something that was seen as a bit of a, you know, handshaking role into something that actually had some bite to it, and in a very you know, done with great calmness. And she was always very true to herself in how she conducted herself as well. Not shouty, not overly aggressive, very female. It's probably a nice way to put it, actually. I got to meet her actually at an event in the Irish Embassy not so long ago, and she's still as impressive as ever. So that really struck me more, the fact that you can kind of do whatever you want, and get on with things. Yeah, and in terms of advice, I mean, I tend to give the same advice to people is, find something you love, and be open to opportunities, because every great plan is a great plan, but unfortunately, the best laid plans, you might just miss a super opportunity. But in terms of bringing yourself to work, I just find for me, I like being busy, so maybe a little bit like Abby. When I'm busy, I don't stress about things quite so much, because actually I don't overthink them in the same way that maybe I do if I've got a lot of time to plan around just one thing. So I find when I'm quite busy, I am myself, because I haven't had time to be anybody else. So it just works for me. So yeah, that's me.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And Sian, let's hear from you.
Do you know what? I was thinking about this one as well. And I usually try and come up with a name. And given this whole topic is about authenticity, I'm going to not do that this time, because I just don't think I am. This is not going to come out right. I don't think I'm wired towards being inspired by other people. Now, okay, this is definitely almost certainly going to come out wrong. My motivation, and whether this makes me different or the same, I don't know. My motivation and also a lot of my resilience comes entirely from within. And I had a recent experience of, and I'm probably quite extreme on that dimension, I think. I had a recent experience, I'm going to have to get better at this, of someone trying to tell me well done, and I thought I could have done this particular thing slightly better. It was good enough, but I could have seen a number of ways in which it could have been better. And I felt almost mildly offended by the fact that they'd taken the time to tell me well done. So why would you need to tell me that? I'll tell me when I've done a good job. And I don't know where this comes from. Probably the right amount of childhood trauma, I guess. But I'm very inwardly motivated, inwardly driven. I've learned to have very kind conversations with myself, but also pretty direct when I think something could have been better or not better. And so I take most of my inspiration from me, which makes me sound like a megalomaniac or a narcissist or some other equally unpleasant word, which I hope is not true. But I don't look around going, where's my example? I look in here and go, what did I learn this time and how can I do better? And hence I always really struggle with this question. And I do usually try and dream up a name, but I'm not really sure, I'm being honest, that I've spent a lot of my time looking at them. And so I'm going to honestly answer and go, I don't notice what's going on with other people. Most of the time I'm usually head down and kind of getting on with my stuff. And maybe I should look for inspiration. Now, having said that, I do listen to lots of podcasts. So it's not people, it's topics and individual speakers. And I'm massively inspired by people's stories, but no one particular person. And I spend at least an hour a day, if not two, listening to podcasts, driving if I'm commuting somewhere. So I definitely go seeking for inspiration, but not inspirational people. Apart from you are my inspiration. I'm going to answer it that way, and there's a healthy dose of truth to that too. So there you go.
Is there a practical tip you'd like to leave us for bringing yourself to work?
I would say have fun, and I think that's a build on doing something you enjoy. I think it speaks. I'm someone who likes to laugh a lot. Often at myself, but I think if you can't have an element of fun at work and with other people, I think that probably gets on the nerves of the people who want to take their jobs quite seriously. But I think for me, you do have to enjoy what you do, and if you're pushing water uphill, just do something else. I would concur with that advice.
Yeah, Priya, I was just going to say, I think that's good advice. A lot of great companies have a final rule, which is you walk the person to the door, and if you can't imagine sitting in an airport with them for 4 hours, then don't hire them.
That's
I think it's a great rule, because if you really can't imagine being stuck in an airport somewhere with this person, and it's the chemistry, right? It's not you, it's not them, it's whether they're going to fit with the vibe. I love that kind of advice as well, because actually it's kind of back to go with your gut in terms of where you're going to be happy as much as what you're doing. Yeah,
great advice. I've not heard that before. I'm going to follow that.
It's my husband's company. They literally have a final rule before they hire somebody, whether it's a small company, and they all say, could you get stuck in an airport with this person? And if the answer is no, they don't hire them. And I think it's wonderful, just as a really kind of human thing to kind of know about whether you like this person or not.
I think it's great.
You spend a lot of time with your team. You spend a lot of time with your team. If you can rub together in a way that's got humour and support and camaraderie and genuinely enjoy each other's company, it dramatically makes a difference. I love that advice. Thank you.
Yeah, and you don't have to be the same. You just have to want to spend time with the person, and I think that's kind of a nice capture. So
yeah, very well.
I'd love to hear from you.
So, Priya, you've heard my example before, I think, actually. The person who inspires me is genuinely my sister. My sister is a little bit younger than me and leads a very different life, has very different aspirations for her career. In fact, she would absolutely say, I don't have a career, I have a job. But her job has been an extraordinarily important one, which is she was a social work assistant for a long time, for about 17 years, and now she works on a farm which is set up to provide therapy to sort of teenage children who need a little bit of extra support. You know, often school's not working for them, home's not working for them, they need a different place to go. And I'm just continuously inspired by her, actually, because she deals with genuinely really stressful situations every single day with a huge amount of grace and patience. And I think her work is so impactful. And Priya, you have asked me before, how do you stay calm? You know, we feel like we're in the eye of the storm, everyone's criticizing us, you know, it feels difficult. How? And I always say the same thing. Our jobs are not that hard compared to my sisters. Like, they're just not. So yeah, I'm very proud of her, and I'm very, as I say, inspired by her patience, which is not something I would have said when we were growing up together. But yeah, no, I often think about like the whole remit of stress and worry and concern, and think, do you know what? I don't want to diminish it. Corporate jobs can be really, really difficult. But actually, if you take a big step back, you know, you should be able to go home at the end of the night and close your laptop and feel like you've done a good job and the world's not going to end that night. You know, like in our kind of jobs, I think you can have that perspective. And my sister reminds me of that all the time. Well, I'm going to stick with the sort of same theme, Priya, if that's okay, and just talk about how to, you know, give yourself that permission to have a break. And it's the most practical tip of all. Turn off every single notification you could possibly turn off on your phone. Don't have that horrible little badge telling you you've got 1,500 unread emails, because I can tell you now, it will just make you feel stressed, and you'll still have 1,500 the next day, probably more. Turn off your LinkedIn notifications. Turn off everything that reminds you of work when you haven't chosen to be reminded of work. And then you can bring that freshness, that, you know, level of energy when you want. And that has genuinely made a big difference. So that's my practical tip. Not quite in the spirit of bringing your authentic self to work, but helpful nonetheless, I think.
I think.
Can I just?
Yeah, go on.
Can I add something to that? I was inspired by that comment. You know, I've worked for people before where every element of working for them is about, oh, I had to work on my holiday and it was just so busy and I couldn't stop, and I didn't manage to get a break, and I'm still tired, and I don't know what people are trying to convey as leaders when they can't take a break, and they can't encourage you to stop, and they can't encourage you to break at weekends. And I think it's so important to stop and turn your notifications off and show other people that that's okay. And it's always made me feel pretty rubbish to work for people who can't ever take a break. And so I think we need to take breaks and really do that very visibly and show other people.
Yeah, and I had actually someone who I would say did give me really good advice through my career, Liv Garfield, who I think we've all worked for at different points. I remember her giving me really, really brilliant advice when I came back off maternity leave, where she said, you've got to start as you mean to continue. So if you say you're going to work part-time, and that was in the context of returning post-maternity for me, but lots of people work part-time now, then don't confuse people by coming in on your day off or just taking a call when you're not meant to be working. Mm-hmm. Actually, then people kind of go, well, I'm not entirely sure when she does work or when he does work. And actually, I think that was it ties into authenticity as well, because you have to kind of own it. Whatever boundaries you set out, set them and then stick to them. And I remember, and I've applied that in all sorts of ways all the way through my career since, actually, and I found that really helpful too. It's a kind of a similar mindset to the holiday thing. Don't confuse people by sending emails if you're taking holidays.
I was given similar and very impactful advice once, where I was doing what was then my normal practice of checking email every day while on holiday, sending a few emails out, responding a bit, triggering a bit of extra work, and my new boss at the time observed me doing this. And then the next holiday came up, not too long after, a couple of months after, and he said, "Are you going to actually switch off? Are you going to stop emailing?" I said, "Oh, I don't mind. I'm on a driving holiday. I'm in the car. I'm not doing anything particularly else. It's fine. I don't mind at all." And he was like, "I think your team mind. So maybe you could stop." And I was so shocked.
Someone said that to me too once.
It's great advice.
It's great feedback, isn't it?
Yeah, but they feel like you don't trust them to make a decision.
Exactly.
What point in saying they've got a delegate authority if they don't? It's
exactly.
Yeah,
I think that's brilliant. And thank you, ladies. As I've said before, I mean, all of you have taught me so much, and I can actually, there are quotes and things that I use in my life, which embarrassingly for all three of you have taught me at some point. But this has been a great conversation, and I'm sure our audience will get a lot out of it. Thank you so much for joining me.